Welcome to the ROK Lights On Innovation podcast series. Our mission is to bring in subject matter experts and shine a spotlight on new technologies and common challenges facing the industrial automation marketplace. In this episode, I'll be interviewing the Rockwell Automation Product Manager for the Bulletin 1694 electronic circuit protectors, Juerg Merki. We'll specifically be addressing the most common questions surrounding the topic of type Class 2 low voltage circuit protection. And to bring a little bit more context to this discussion, I'd highly recommend that you check out a previous video I posted on this topic of choosing the correct circuit protection devices for your 24 volt DC control circuits. I've included a link to the video below, or you can go to the ROK Lights On Innovation YouTube channel and find it there. And with that, let's check out the interview. Well, good morning, Juerg. Welcome, direct from Aarau, Switzerland. Juerg Merki is our product manager at Rockwell Automation for our Bulletin 1694 electronic circuit protectors. And we thought that we would call him in today to have a discussion around some of the common questions that have arisen out of the video that I posted a couple of weeks ago, talking about the proper ways of protecting control circuits that are 24 volt DC rated in comparison to the older, conventional 120 volt circuits. And specifically, a lot of the questions that I've got were directed around the whole topic around Class 2 and what that means. There's a little bit of misconception about some issues there, and we thought that since Juerg sort of lives in this world with his specific function within Rockwell on a pretty regular basis, that he might be able to lend a little bit of information to us that would be beneficial to everybody. So welcome, Juerg. Glad to have you.
Good morning, Al, and thanks for having me.
Sure, it's great to have you here. So let's go ahead and just take a look at some of the common questions that I got around Class 2, and maybe you could discuss, really just to get started with the to introduce the topic around really what is Class 2 and what are we really talking about, and clear up some of those misconceptions with maybe another type of Class 2 topic that people talk about in our industry.
Right. Yeah, so NEC Class 2, that's the full title, is a US requirement. And this is in connection with NFPA 70. And basically, it's power limitation within 24 volt DC applications to 100 VAs. So that means 100 VAs divided by 24 volt equals something like 4 amps. So NEC Class 2 equals power limitation, and the meaning of it is to reduce shock, which can potentially happen to electrical engineers or maintenance person, and to decrease the risk of fire hazards. And not to be confused with hazardous location ratings. Often people refer to Class 1 Div 2. Class 1 and NEC Class 2 has nothing to do with each other. So one is Class 1 Div 2 is hazardous location. NEC Class 2 is the power limitation, 24 volt DC applications.
Okay, so that's, and I would say that might not be an uncommon misconception there. So appreciate you getting that cleared up for us. So when you talk about a Class 2 rated device, okay, or component, how would one tell what a class 2 rated component was. I mean, what is it about the device? Can you look at it and tell, or is there some sort of label, or how do you know that it's a class 2
Right.
rated device?
Yeah, right. That's it must be clearly marked on the component itself. For instance, if we take a sensor, it must be marked or written somewhere on the surface of the sensor that it's class 2 or class 2 power source required. So the keyword is class 2. If you find this on the surface of your component, you can be sure that it's a class 2 component.
Okay, so that's great information. And now that we know how we can actually visually identify a class 2 rated device, why don't we talk about what those typical devices actually are? For instance, I know that a number of the Rockwell Automation machine safety components, like the guard shield light curtains, a few of the different gate interlock switches, and I believe also the Lifeline 5 cable pull switches, are all Class 2 rated devices. But what are the other typical, most common Class 2 rated devices that we'll come across?
Yeah, typically sensors. This is probably the most dominant family of products, which are NEC Class 2. Then some HMIs like the panel view 800. The small panel view is also requiring an NEC Class 2 power source. The Micro 810, for instance, that is also using or classified as an NEC Class 2. And of course, the bulletin 6094 ECP, the electronic circuit protection, is specifically designed and labeled as NEC Class 2 as well. I mentioned before the maximum of 4 amps. So the 1 to 4 amps of the protection modules are NEC Class 2 rated devices.
So, what about, because I've gotten this question a time or two. You did mention about the one of the Micro 800 family PLCs, but what about the other PLCs? You know, a Compact Logics or a Control Logics, or maybe a standard Panel View Plus 7 or Panel View 5500 or what? Why would those devices not be included? And are some of those potentially a Class 2 rated component?
Good question, El. I can only guess because when they are, for instance, the PLC is complete assembled, uh, the power consumptions might exceed the 4 amps. That would be my guess.
Okay, so now let's talk a little bit more about the requirements. When is it actually required to have a Class 2 power source? Um, and then we'll get into some of the benefits and reasoning why that we would want to have a Class 2 power source. So, what would be the answer to that question?
So, with regards to power source, it's typically we talk about small loads, right? Sensors or a PLC or a panel view. This is current-wise; these are small loads, and typically we have a portfolio of NEC Class 2 power supplies, which again are marked on the device, and to power up an NEC Class 2 component, of course, you need NEC Class 2 power supply or power source. However, you can, and that's the beauty of the 6094s, you can separate NEC class circuits and let's say a bunch of sensors plus a panel view 800 and make this protected by an electronic circuit protection, and that's an NEC2 class circuit. And then you don't need a power supply which is NEC class 2 rated. So it allows you to, let's say, probably separate is the wrong word, but it allows you to distinguish between NEC class 2 circuits and normal circuits or non-rated NEC class 2 circuits.
And so, in other words, if the customer has got a control panel that they're needing a lot more than that 4.16 amps or the 100 VA that's allowed by a class 2 power source, without having to have two power supplies in their control panel, they could use a, let's say, for instance, a 20 amp power supply, and then protect the class 2 components with the 1694 circuit protectors. That's the beauty of the electronic circuit protectors, correct?
Correct. You described it perfectly.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about the requirements around labeling. We mentioned and showed some examples of how a class 2 device has got the markings on it. What's driving that, and what's the requirement for the labeling?
So the labeling, as I mentioned, it must be clearly marked on the component as class 2 component, and that applies for the component itself, the power source, and the protection module. Okay. So this is a mandatory requirement, if you like.
And is that driven by the National Electric Code or UL or both, or what?
Both. Actually, NEC Class 2, which is the National Electric Code, that's a legal requirement.
Okay. Now, but there's maybe a little caveat to that. Let's say I'm a OEM and I ship machines all over the globe. Is this a global requirement, or is this just a U.S. requirement? You're talking about a National Electric Code here, and yep. UL, and this we're talking about North American type of requirements and standards. So give me a little bit of insight into that.
This is exclusively for the US. So UL and NEC Class 2 is for the US market only. The IEC world does not know this distinguishing between NEC Class 2 and standard devices.
So it is possible that it wouldn't be required, but it might be that the OEM would use a best practice of utilizing the standard, regardless of whether it was in the United States or not. But it's not a requirement of like the European Union or
other it's definitely not. It's vice versa, actually. If equipment or machinery is built in, for instance, Europe and exported to the US, of course, then NEC Class 2 applies, and the European manufacturers would have to bother about this. Absolutely.
Now let's finish up by talking about a few of the key benefits around having a device that's actually certified as a Class 2 design. So what about the size of the components and the conductors and everything? What are we dealing with there as far as maybe a benefit to a Class 2 design?
Right. Basically, we are talking about control voltage, 24-volt DC control voltage. So NEC Class 2 is power limitation for DC voltage. There's no such thing as in or an equivalent in AC terms, voltage terms. So DC only. And by limiting the power to 100 watts, we are talking about smaller components with regards to footprint. And another benefit is, of course, smaller diameter wiring. So this increases the maintenance person or the design engineer's safety, because when every time you open a cabinet door, there is the potential risk for an electric shock. And it's less shock if we're talking about 24-volt DC and power limitation compared to AC.
The last thing that I thought was interesting, I never gave it a whole lot of thought, and that has to do with just the testing process that it takes to bring a product to market around UL and everything. So how does having a device already designated as a Class 2 device, how does that affect the testing process?
To the best of my knowledge, when the UL inspector comes into your location and for the final inspection of the machine or the equipment, if you can prove to him that is the design is in accordance with NEC Class 2, it's only paperwork. So less work with the UL inspector, and at the end of the day, easier to deal with.
So to get wrapped up, is there anything specifically that we left off, or any other parts of the discussion you wanted to add before we finish up?
There's a whole bunch of information if you refer to the Rockwell Automation webpage. Just type in NEC Class 2 and you should be able to find additional information on our webpage.
That's great. Well, I really appreciate you taking a few moments out of your day to talk to us, and hopefully this will be some beneficial information for some of the folks out there that were asking me these questions. And we will catch up with you later.
Okay. Thank you, El.